Hi, and welcome to the Team Deakins podcast. This podcast is a dialogue between Roger and James Deakins, starting with a submitted question or topic and ending who knows where. We will also be joined by guests for some topics. If you'd like to submit a question, email it to webmaster@rogerdeakins.com. Today's question is about location scouting on a feature. Before a location is chosen, it has to be scouted to see whether it will work for the specific scene. We talk about the many elements that go into a location scout. So when you go on a location scout, what are you looking for? Are you looking for composition, lighting, the ease of actually shooting there? What's on your mind when you walk into
you're
a
thinking
location?
about all those things, but why the earlier scout's so important, because it's really, you want time with the director and the production designer just talking about how the scene is going to work conceptually in the space you're looking at. And you know, I read the scripts, and obviously I have certain ideas on things and a feeling of how a scene could work. And maybe I haven't talked with the director about it before we've scouted. I mean, usually you have some general conversation, but, you know, there's nothing like standing in a room, and it might not be the right room, but then you understand why it isn't the right room as you discuss it, as you sort of talk about the blocking that could happen with the scene and the mood of the space and what the production designer could do with it to make it more in keeping with what's in the script, you know, in terms of dressing and the kind of feel of it. And then is that worth it? So a lot of the time it's, even if the locations don't work at all for the film, it's kind of key to be there and be discussing it, because when you get 10 or 15 people on a scout, you rarely get the chance. I mean, sometimes it's great. The director will say, okay, we'll just have the 3 of us or 4 of us will go and look at the location before everybody else will be there. And that's really important as well, you know, and then everybody can look at it and see the issues. But that's after you've had these initial conversations that are much more about a conceptual idea of a scene and how the location fits the idea, you know, the script.
So when you go into a location with the director and the production designer, you basically go through the way the blocking of the scene might go. In other words, he says, well, I think he'd play it over here and the other character would be over there. So you get an idea of what the actual blocking might be. Yeah,
you kind of walk through the blocking and a possible blocking in a space. And figure if, you know, are people too far apart? Are they too close together? Is the hallway too short? How can we lengthen it? You know, it's all that sort of...
And this gives you sort of an idea of how you might shoot it, too. Oh, this is actually quite a long length between the two people, so I might want to do it this way.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it varies, because if you're working with Joel and Ethan Coen, I mean, often the storyboards will have been done before the final locations are chosen. So then it's very specific if that location works for what's conceptually in the storyboards. But then with Denis, I mean, you'll maybe have talked it conceptually, but until you look at the space, sometimes you see a space and it's nothing like you've talked about, but then you realize, Mike, could really work because we could do such and such, you know. So that's, to me, that's such a key part of the whole creative process. Your job as a cinematographer, you know. The idea of just turning up and shooting on a location that's been chosen and you're just seeing it for the first time after it's been chosen is, you know, it can work. Obviously, you can make it work, but it's not quite so satisfying, really.
Yeah, and basically the visual of the film is being created with the director, the DP, the production designer. So this can add to the vision, change the vision, whatever, because when you're actually in a space, and I think with films, it's really important not to be locked into, it's got to be this way and only this way. You have to go in and be open to a location and go, huh,
Yeah.
it actually would work better going this way.
Absolutely. It may be, maybe a room is 4 times bigger than you really want it to be, but maybe it wouldn't shoot that way. That's the thing. You got to kind of gauge what is the scene. If it's just 2 people sitting talking to each other, then you don't have to see the whole room, obviously. And if the scene is short, you want to shoot it in natural light, and the director thinks a few hours is long enough, then maybe you take and it's winter in New York, maybe you take the challenge and say, okay. But then in the end, you've got to sort of say, well, we are light dependent. It's like doing an exterior, So all those things got to be balanced out, really. But I say the key points creatively is what you're looking for in that location when you first see it with the director and the production designer, and their reaction, and just exploring it together. That's the fun, really.
Yeah, and then also once you've gotten an idea of the location too, because so much of getting to the look of the movie is just a process. It's not like you see the location and you know exactly how to light it. You've got it in your head. I could do it this way, I could do it that way.
Yeah.
And since you've seen it so early, it's just given you a little bit more time to bat around.
Figure it out. Yeah.
And to wake up in the middle of the
But
night.
you do have to, but you do also have to be honest early on.
Yes.
If you see something you don't think, like I was saying before, like is impractical because the access is so limited, or there's no way of lighting through the windows because you're facing out onto Fifth Avenue in New York or whatever, and you can't get permits. All these things have to be taken in. I don't want to be left in a world where you're... it's possible if you're, again, shooting just 2 people talking to each other and it's daylight, but, on the 5th floor, fine. Maybe you just put the lights inside the room and make it look like it's being lit from outside. That's fine. If it's that kind of, restricted kind of scene. But if you want to see the whole room...
And the windows.
Yeah, and it's kind of a complicated camera move or number of shots or whatever, then you really have to be honest and say, well, this is going to be really restricting. It's going to be frustrating for many reasons.
Well, I think, too, it's important to say those things because on the day... when you do indeed not make the day because it's not possible, the pressure or the eyes might be looking towards you, and yet it's important to have said it beforehand. You can say, I told you so. No.
Yeah.
But
no, yeah. And then sometimes it's good to have in your mind an alternative if you do get in trouble when,
that's true. So okay, this one's going to be a tough one. If I get there and it's a rainy day, so the light's not that good, what am I going to do? What's my plan B?
Yeah, you kind of need to cover yourself because it's surprising how little people remember what you say on a scout.
No, people never do remember that. But and then also having seen the location, you can convey to the tech guys earlier, what the situation's going to be and what your concerns are. And
I guess that's the other thing. I like seeing a place early on, and even if it's not used, we'll do drawings of it, and I'll figure out a lighting plan and draw it all out, and then I'll talk to the gaffer and the key grip and the riggers about it, and then production kind of get a sense of what's involved before the location is actually locked down and they've paid a lot of money for it.
Yeah. And actually production, kind of even before you do the location scouting, wants to know how much it's going to cost anyway.
They want to know before you just look at a picture,
So the sooner, because they'll just keep asking, so the sooner you can give them some idea, the more helpful it is to them.
It has happened. You said, well, this is what I need to do here to have an option of shooting it. And then they've said, well, we can't afford that. We can't do it.
So when you go on a location scout, do you bring a camera with you? Do you use the camera? Do you take shots as reference for later?
I mean, I usually carry a camera when I'm on a scout, yeah, just because I like carrying a camera, and sometimes I take photographs that I just like myself. Got nothing to do with the movie. But yeah, I'll take my own reference images because the location manager will take pictures of a location, but without knowing exactly the lens, and they're very deceptive. So yeah, I like to be there, and from my own memory, I like to help that by taking my own pictures. No, I don't take them as references for what the shot will necessarily be. It's more to look at the practicalities of the space and to remind myself of it and know that I'm there, standing there with a 27mm lens and on my camera, and I know what that relates to. And then, I used to always carry a viewfinder, but I don't now because you can do it on the phone. iPhone's got the apps. It's kind of a lot easier. So
I think it's also, in the early days too, a good way of being able to communicate with the guys, the gaffer, the grips, and say, okay, this window's going to be a problem, and all of that.
I mean, I'm used to do a lot. Take a viewfinder and walk through the shots with a director. You do that a lot. Not happened so much lately. I mean, usually the director's got the app on their iPhone as well. So, we're all looking at things. It's, in a way, it's less mysterious what the camera's doing now because everybody's got a phone app and can look at the framing. But also when you come to the shoot, everybody can see what you're shooting. It's not like a black box that's going to be, the film's not, goes later.
Which is a good thing.
For me, that's a really good thing. Mm-hmm. The more you can talk about it. That's why I say I like the initial scouts. It's all part of the same reasoning in my head. The more open it is, the more discussion there is earlier on, the more communication there is about the wish list, the concepts, but then also the practicalities and the lenses and the equipment and everything else. I mean, the more discussion, the better, I think. But
yeah, the more prepared. When you go on a location scout, you've got a list of locations that you're seeing. Do you have any say in those locations before, or is it the production designer that's gotten the choice together?
No, what's usually happened is even on the initial location scouts, if you're going to specific places, even if there's not a production office and you're at home and the director's in New York and we're here and then a production designer's Hawaii or wherever they are, you'll all get sent images from by the location manager or the location scouts, and you'll have talked about the idea of each location and the look, and then you'll kind of swap thoughts on the choices. So I've been involved in that. So when you are going to look locations, you've been part of the choice of which ones you see. Not always, but sometimes initially, like I say, you can end up, on the Bond picture, going to Shanghai, and some of the locations were kind of chosen, a few options, and then find, then you've got to more talk about it. You've got to, more to consider really. But you're usually involved in the early stuff as well. I am anyway. Yeah. And
generally, are the storyboards done before looking at locations or after?
When the storyboards are done, it varies, depends on the film and the director, the way they like to work. I remember a few times with Joel and Ethan that initial storyboards were done in advance. When I first worked with them on Barton Fink, for instance, we were sitting in a hotel room doing storyboards and not scouting. And then maybe we'd done half of it and we started scouting. And then sometimes the storyboards were adapted to things we'd seen. But generally they like to have it in their minds, and then you're looking for something very specific to match the storyboards, really. I'd say something like, Blade Runner, we sat in a hotel room in Montreal. Forever doing but we kind of really storyboarded what were going to be sets, what we imagined were going to be sets, and then left open certain other things. So when we started scouting, which was, I think our initial scouts, we actually went to London. We didn't even shoot there. And what happened is we were looking at different brutalist architecture in London to get a better sense of the kind of look of the film from seeing something real. And then we went to Budapest to look at that. And I think that was just Denny and I.
Mm-hmm. And also Serbia or something, right?
And we went to a few different places just as a sort of day trip. To look at specific buildings that had been shown to us in pictures, basically, and to give us ideas. And then we sort of honed in slowly on the look of the film and related that to what was possible, what locations could give us something like we were thinking about. So in a way, then with Denny, the storyboarding and the locations all sort of work together.
Does it happen that you go and you look at locations and the locations aren't really working, and then the decision comes up, should we do this in a set? Does that happen frequently?
Yeah, we were down to shoot in Shanghai on the Bond movie, on Skyfall. And
right.
It just, some of it seemed totally impractical, and I didn't understand why we were going to Shanghai for it, because it seemed incredibly expensive to do it that way. And what happened actually is we were actually going on a major scout with a lot of people. And when we got there, there'd been a typhoon go through, and there was a standing set on a backlot on the edge of Shanghai that we were going to use for the casino, and it had blown down. And Dennis and I talked, and I said, it's kind of crazy. You come out here and build that. You could build that in Pinewood. And the scene that was meant to be in this office on the tower block and lit by all the advertising signs through the window at night. And I said, well, we've not found anything that has the sparkle of what that could be if you built it on the Bond stage, the 007 stage at Pinewood, and made it out of glass. As she said, if you made the walls out of glass, we could have something really interesting. And I could just do it with big false perspective signs.
And really, that decision not to go on location, but to build it in the set, enabled us to make such a great scene.
It was not just about the cost, but you think the cost has ramifications on what you can do on the day of the shoot. So it was really a creative decision, but the cost, I said, had a knock-on effect. We saved a lot of money, I think. What was interesting, it was another little sequence in Skyfall where they travel to this remote island, right?
Yeah.
And they're walking through this kind of ruined city on this island where the main character, played by Javier, is sort of hung out. And initially, we were going to go and scout this island off Japan and maybe shoot their second unit, who knew? But we loved this island. We loved the look of it from the sea, and we loved the buildings internally to it. And so one location scout went there and shot all these location pictures of it. And we were looking at them in the production office one day, and they were saying, well, it'd be really expensive to go there. And both Sam and I wanted to do it and go there ourselves. And then we kind of storyboarded with these pictures what we could use and what this little sequence of this journey would be. And then we realized most of it had to be built on the backlot at Pinewood because the actors involved, you couldn't do all that on this island. We basically wanted 4 or 5 shots. So I remember we talked to Steve Begg, right, and said, well, can't you use what the location scout shot with his camera? I think it was a D5 or something. And he said, yeah, we can up-res it. And I said, can you make a tracking shot with it? He said, yeah, we'll give it dimension and we can have the little figures walking through this and the camera can slowly move over the buildings in the foreground. So right there, suddenly the whole thing changes from some huge adventure with either a second unit or us going there and all the actors, and it's all done digitally from still frames. And I think that's partly a wonderful thing about digital technology now. But, you've got to be open to do these things, because the money saved on that could go to building the big set on the 007 stage.
Well, that's just it. It's not just when you're choosing a location, you're also having to think, okay, how expensive is it? Where is it? What's the actor's availability? What's the location's availability? So if we did this in a set, could we do it next to the scene where the actor's also in?
Right.
There's so many logistical things that you have to think about.
It's a huge jigsaw puzzle that you have to kind of...
And you have to decide, the look of this location just helps the film so much. We've got to do it no matter what. But then another one, it's a great look and everything, but we could reproduce it and it would help us. So it's not quite as cut and dry as you would think.
No, the big gamble with using these still photographs of the island and never going there was obviously the sun was out. It was really hard shadows, which was perfect because that's what we wanted.
But we were shooting in England, so that's a problem.
And we shot the yacht approaching the island for the one scene.
Right.
Off Turkey, and it was beautiful, sunlit water. It was fantastic. But then we did that afterwards. But actually, the continuation of the scene with the set on the backlight at Pinewood, we shot, I think, was it late February?
Yeah.
In England. So that was a big
gamble, yeah.
But, we got 10 days of beautiful sunshine. The day wasn't very long because the sun wasn't up that long in February in England, but we were so lucky. And it was this really nice, soft sun. So, you take a chance. I've been really lucky with the weather over the years. But that was one of the luckiest I can ever remember. It was fantastic.
And another consideration that you should have, I wish all films did, is you've got to think about cover sets. If you have a lot of exteriors, you really have to think about cover sets. And sometimes this gets overlooked, but you have to think about something that can be in a stage that you can use at any time. So if you run into the wrong weather on your exteriors, you can pop into this particular scene and you can carry that scene. So that's again, actor availability and actual location. Are you going to another city? How you work that out. But
I remember going on a scout for a film that never happened actually, in a very remote part of Africa. And there was this wonderful location, but there was nothing around it. No town, nothing. No hotels, nothing. And the scene probably involved 500 extras or something and their actors. You thought, okay, that's wonderful. I mean, I'd done a number of films in Africa where everybody lives in tents, and that's fine. It's quite nice. But then there was another location that was consecutive that was maybe 100 miles from that with the same people. And there was no way you could find anywhere to have weather cover on that either. And, those kind of things, you go, well, that's... The second location will equally remote. You can do it. I mean, certainly on a film called Mountains of the Moon in Africa, in Kenya, we did a lot of that, a lot of moving. But most of the scenes with the large crowds were done in quite a reasonable distance from Nairobi. So you had the infrastructure. People could say, you had something going for you, and then you could flip off to a remote location with fewer people, or even with a lot of people, but the tented camp had been set up. So you went there, and then you went back to somewhere else where you could stay locally while that camp was moved somewhere. It's this sort of jigsaw of how you do it. You can, but I mean, to take one remote location after another and expect to go between them with no down days, because down days still cost. They're not shoot days.
Yeah.
You lose your shooting time. So it's a real trade-off, isn't it?
And you can find a perfect location that doesn't have enough hotels.
Yeah.
And if you recall,
that's what I mean.
1917, we did Salisbury Plain, which was perfect for us, but it was a nightmare for hotels. What it forced us, we had no give and take. So if we got a little bit ahead, we couldn't get to the next location because they didn't have the hotel rooms ready. So,
yeah. I mean, they had a
and
bit
we
of
were
leeway, but
scattered across miles.
Yeah. But but then you make the choice, don't you? Because the location is so good,
Yeah.
But it is something you have to take into account.
No, exactly. And it was the right decision to make, but it was something that wasn't evident right away. Oh, this is a perfect location.
Yeah.
And of course, production goes, yeah, but where's everybody going to stay? How are we going to find the rooms? And we were there 7 weeks, and we had to move out of our hotel for one night, which is really hard when you're in the middle of shooting. But there was a wedding there. And as much as we were hoping that they'd split up, they didn't split up before their wedding. So we had to go.
Yeah. Well, there was one time we moved on Mountains of the Moon. We moved across Kenya. We were in Lake Turkana in the northeast, and then the next scene we shot was like near Malindi on the coast, and the whole crew and the actors had to travel from one to the other. I think there were 25 small planes that took us from one place to another. And now it was brilliant. It was all worked in, and it worked fantastically well. But you've got to realize when you're standing on Lake Turkana that that's the implication of shooting there. I'm really glad we did, and Bob, the director, was really happy, and we're all happy. And it worked to charm because Terry Clegg, production manager on it, did a fantastic job. But it's a huge endeavor to do those sort of things,
So basically what we're saying is that choosing locations isn't quite as simple as it looks, that there's a lot that you have to take into account when you're location scouting, but it's a good period of time because you're learning more about the film and with the director. So it's definitely valuable, but you can't always get the location that you want.
No, I mean, what we've been talking about a kind of rather bigger, kind of like more adventurous kind of things, but it still relates to a small film. You might not have you have less money, but if the wish list is probably similar. And
well, in a way, I think on a small film, it's even more important that you go on the initial location scouts because you don't have as many solutions because you can't throw money at it to make it work. So you really have to think, is this going to be feasible, this location? So I think it's even more important.
Yeah, there was one interesting thing, I think, but scouting for one of the Coen Brothers films, and I forget which it was now. Oh, no, it's Hail Caesar, right. We loved one location, but we didn't have a reverse.
Oh, right, yeah.
So we started looking for a location with a reverse, but we couldn't find it. So we shot 2 different locations, but then I had to figure, okay, we shoot the one location at dawn, and the light is in a certain angle, but then we shoot the other reverse at dusk, because the light, it was facing totally different, but the light felt like the same angle relative to the first one, if you know what I mean. So, those things, it has to be taken into account and built into the schedule. So it's not just, okay, we'll take these, and somebody else, the first AD schedules that in. I mean, I often sit for days with a first AD going through a schedule.
Well, actually, what happens is I think that they do their pass of the schedule, and then you look at it and you realize, because you know what it's entailing, and you know that that's not possible to do in that kind of time, or you know that in actuality, the thing that he's given 3 days to can be done in 2.
Yeah.
So you can help him by giving him a day, but you can also say, listen, it's just never going to work this way.
But it's also scheduling time of day.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
yes. And how that works. And, if you're light dependent, what time you start, how long does the director need to do blocking rehearsal and all that. So the location scouts, that's all part of thinking about those things when you scout locations.
Because one of the first things you think about when you go on a location is what angle is the sun going to be at what time.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when we get right down to it, we get light studies of a location
Yeah.
to see where the sun's going to be at what time of day and figure out what time of day in the schedule we're going to be shooting it. And that helps us also figure out when to schedule what, especially when you have days where you've got 2 short scenes, so you're trying to do 2 on a day. Which one comes first and which one comes second?
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, so much to think about locations.
Much.
Yeah, it's not as simple as it looks.
It's giving me a headache.
Thanks for listening. If you want more information and further discussion, check out the forums at www.rogerdeakins.com. Becoming a member is free, and you can ask follow-up questions there. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more new questions and topics. See you next time.